Hello, and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we're reviewing Evil Does Not Exist. Written and directed by Ryusuke Hamaguchi, Evil Does Not Exist follows Takumi, a widower who lives with his 8-year-old daughter Hana in the peaceful Japanese mountain village of Mizubiki. In a community meeting, Takumi and residents are confronted with a proposal to develop a glamping site. The film stars Hitoshi Omika and Ryo Nishikawa. So Jeffrey, what do you think about Evil Does Not Exist?
Hamaguchi rose to prominence with his film Drive My Car, which was from 2021, which is like this kind of 3-hour emotional odyssey. I would say mostly played itself straight as a melodrama, but a film that, even though it was long and slow and was digestible to an art house crowd, I would say overall. He made another film that year called Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, which I think took a lot more liberties with playing with the form of filmmaking. So I think if you characterize him as a filmmaker around Drive My Car, which he's maybe most known for, it may give you the impression that he's this dewy-eyed humanist and he makes these glacially paced melodramas. For all of the merits that Drive My Car has, it is a film that has familiar emotional beats, even if they're more spread out. But I think he shows in Evil Does Not Exist that he has a lot of tricks up his sleeve, and some of his other films in his filmography show that too. Everyone has flaws or blind spots in their film criticism, and I said this to you when we briefly talked about the film, but mine are certainly that I would much rather have a conversation around a film than be spoon-fed a message. And I'll often forgive a film that's too opaque in its messaging simply because it's so interesting to talk about and think about. Evil Does Not Exist is a film that I find somewhat confounding, but really oddly entrancing. I couldn't say there was a second of this film that I wasn't utterly gripped by the mysterious and dread-filled vibe that the film had going on. It's a film where you're waiting around for something really awful to happen, even as seemingly non-awful things happen all the time. Hamaguchi is a filmmaker here, though obfuscating plot and meaning more often than not, I think seems completely in control of tone and atmosphere and the feeling that he is trying to yield from various filmmaking techniques. I thought this was really special for a lot of reasons, not the least of which that it leaves you with far more questions than it does answers. It's a film that's supremely confident in the idea that it doesn't need to solve a lot of things for you, and it's purposely opaque in so many ways.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a film that doesn't seek to tell you its own message. That being said, I do think this film takes really a lot of attention and reflection. I think in true Hamaguchi fashion, as related to Drive My Car, we're provided, I think, with a lot of these clues and information that are stealthily hidden in the film's frames and in the characters' dialogue.
Yep.
Many of these things are hidden in very mundane actions and conversation, which make them very easy to overlook or miss, I would say. However, I think these moments are absolutely vital because they inform the film's themes and bridge them with the character's motivations and actions. To start, I do want to jump to the beginning of the film because I think the beginning is very interesting. We are welcomed into it with a camera angle that is looking directly up at the sky and it is tracking through the woods. So all we see are these treetops. This sequence probably takes about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe even longer than 3 or 4 minutes.
It's pretty long. I have a thing to say about this later, but it ties into a spoiler.
Yeah.
But anyway.
On a first watch, I think it's very easy to not make much of this sequence. It's very long. It's very winded shot that takes up almost too much runtime of only 90 minutes of roughly a total runtime of this film generally. But from there, we're introduced to our main character, Takumi, and his daughter. Basically, we are seeing scenes of their daily life. We see them walking through the woods and they're pointing to different trees and pointing out what those types of trees are. And we see him collecting water with his local neighbor. It's not really until about 50 minutes into this film, much like Drive My Car, that we're finally welcomed to the narrative, where this film is going in the story itself. That takes place in this community meeting that we discussed earlier. The people in the village are having this meeting with some developers that are interested in making this glamping business in the woods. In this meeting, questions begin to arise about multiple things. One is the placement of the septic tank. The local udon restaurant, the owner of that restaurant relies, as well as the rest of the community, on the water from the local spring. And then others have questions about the deer trail that passes through the area where the glamping site will be built, or that the property itself is at risk for wildfires. And it's at this point that you begin to realize and see that the wider thematic structure is being built around nature. And in hindsight, that opening scene is no longer just the shot of some trees. It's really the very foundation of the film itself.
Yes. And I'll have more to say about that.
Yeah.
Actually. But you're right to think that this film, it starts in a way that's almost reminiscent of slow cinema. We've all seen like Sundance movies where somebody does nothing around their house for like 15 minutes and it's kind of a vibe, but it doesn't have much to do with anything. This film could trick you into thinking that that's that, but everything that happens in the first 20 minutes of this film, even as it's lulling you into a certain sleep, is actually very vitally important to the themes, I would say. How the film is structured is structured so oddly because we begin with that slow introduction to our main character and his processes in the natural world, cutting wood, gathering water for the village, etc. From there, the film is almost split in half by that mesmerizing scene you're talking about where the talent agency comes in to talk about the glamping plans for the village. That scene is really tense and has like a tremendous amount of depth to it. You feel like the dead-eyed talking points from our corporate team. You get the gradual introductions of various people from the village who have all of these various statuses within the village, and everything they say seems to be like a thematic metaphor, but also shows their devotion to ecological preservation. After that, we oddly, very oddly, follow these two talent agency folks for a little bit. They become more sympathetic. They share personal stories and doubts about their role within the corporate structure. We see that they're just cogs in the machine. And then we return back to the village for the end of the film, get more of that character and setting building before the film essentially becomes this like allegorical thriller towards the end that we'll talk about
later. Yeah.
We'll talk about in our spoiler section. I think a lot of films, especially for the running length that this film has, which is just above 90 minutes, would have chosen a side, and this film doesn't want to, which I really admire. This film has a wide canvas in which to explore complicated motivations and the way that an individual works within the framework of something larger. So I really liked its shifting point of view. I really liked its shifting perspective. I would say that last couple minutes to drive my car that really subverted my expectations is a thing that this film does like every 20 minutes.
I completely agree, and the ending is something we certainly need to get into because
we'll talk about that.
What's crazy is when we're watching the film, I felt very surprised by the ending, but upon reflection, I become less and less surprised.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I actually said to you yesterday, we were supposed to review this film yesterday, and I said, I think I need an extra day with it because it was starting to come together in my mind what I think that the film was actually about, and I needed some more time to parse through it. It's a complex film. It's not a movie that like you're going to see it and say, cool, I get it. See you later. It's a movie that's going to live in your brain for a little bit, and you're going to have to parse through it.
So you're talking about this feeling like something bad was going to happen throughout the film, and that really relied a lot heavily on the score and also a little bit of imagery that plays within the film. So I want to discuss those things. In the film, we get these particular sequences that play with this underlying very dark music with the strings being played, the piano being played in a very dark tone. It really gives the impression that something bad's going to happen. We get this imagery of this dead carcass of a deer that is lying in the woods, and there's two particular instances where we see this. There's one particular shot where he is walking with his daughter through the woods, and another time later on where he's walking with the two corporatists, people that are trying to start the glamping site.
I think that I have to go into themes at this point. What I'm about to say with theme isn't like overtly spoilery, but you may be able to infer what's happening.
You know what it is? I think we're talking too in detail for the movie anyways. I think this is a type of review where if you haven't seen the movie, I think it makes more sense to watch a review after seeing it.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about themes. It's a film that I think in many ways is about the balance of opposing forces. The balance between upstream and downstream, between the natural world and the developed world, the corporate world, like good and evil, if those things even exist, which we could talk about what the title means. But the director makes clear to us by, I think, his opening shot and his final shot, and you talked about the opening shot for a little bit, which essentially mirrors one another with these like slow upward shots into the sky, looking through the trees. So the opening shot is silent through like during the light of day. The final shot is more desperately enigmatic as that shot is now nighttime and we hear the trudging of feet that eventually come to a stop. But it's the exact same shot. It's just done at opposing times of the day. The score mirrors this also, as you were talking about. There's this fusion of like discordant atonal sections paired with more naturally beautiful and harmonic sections. There's this amazing cut both of us remarked on. The hiker in the corporate PowerPoint cuts to the little girl following the deer track, almost as if the natural world and the human world are colliding. These two opposite things that are not in balance colliding with one another. With these examples, the film is asking us how these opposites interact and how we keep them in balance, which really comes to what I think the ending is about.
Do we get into the ending now?
Why not?
Okay, so what's interesting about the ending is that so many of the details throughout this movie really play a part in our understanding of the ending. So that's why I feel like we need to discuss the ending and maybe some things that predate the ending. So when we get to the end of the film, we find Hana in the woods. There is 2 deer in front of her, and we find out that one of the deer has been shot. This is alluded to earlier in the film. I think it's Takumi is talking about if a deer is shot, it is only likely to attack because it is fearful and protective of its surroundings. Seeing this field and seeing Hana like sitting in the field right in front of this deer, you immediately have this understanding of, wow, this deer is going to do something bad. And that leads us down a weird rabbit hole. Takumi strangling the corporate guy that is with him. I think this is a very interesting sequence because it's hard to tell whether this is reality, whether he is running up to help her and try to save her, or if he's running up to her dead body and she's already dead. And what we see of the deer there is actually Takumi's memory of like, oh, this is probably what went down.
So that's how I interpreted it. We follow this strand of balance that I was talking about. The ending almost works as like an eco parable. Takumi, our main character, is established as a man who's like very in touch with his surroundings, his natural surroundings. He's almost like a shaman of the land of sorts.
Yeah.
But when he comes upon the deer and his daughter in the final scene, I think he's seeing what happened previously because he has knowledge of the fact that that would have happened.
Yeah.
Because the deer was there, then suddenly his daughter is on the ground when it cuts back. So when he sees his daughter on the ground, I think he realizes what happened. Another thing that's alluded to throughout the film is we hear gunshots.
Yes.
So we always hear gunshots from far away. We say, oh, they're hunting deer in the village over there, blah, blah, blah. Before he approaches his daughter, and in recognizing that a human life is being taken in place of an animal life, he kills Takahashi, the male talent agency corporate guy, right? In the hope that killing him can achieve the balance of the deer's life being taken from the natural world.
Oh, that's an interesting take.
So then he grabs his daughter, starts running with her in his arms in the hope that that murder helped her survival. In that way, he offers the man essentially as a sacrifice in recognition that you take from nature what you must then replenish.
Oh, I interpreted much differently.
No, I would love to hear it because I genuinely think that you could interpret this film in like 20 different ways, probably more, but that's the way I took it. Like I thought that the film was like very allegorical, a parable, or like something you would hear in Greek mythology, that what's happening is not literally what's happening. It's more meant to teach you a lesson and be a metaphor for these various things.
I do want to just note a little bit earlier, there were so many things alluding to the sequence at the end. There's also this other scene where the elder in the village, he tells Hana at one point not to go walking by herself.
Yes.
I think that's another foreboding moment that happens that's like alluding to her passing in the end. So in my mind, I actually took the ending as the reduction of humanity to its most primal state.
Oh, yeah.
A state where our behavioral instincts really take the steering wheel and supersede any ability to control oneself. And I think in that ending, we realize as human beings that have advanced in so many ways.
We have clamping.
With clamping now, we are still part of the natural order. And I think more so than we actually thought. And I think this ending is an example of that. So the way I interpreted that scene was that he had lost his daughter, and that puts him in a very emotional state. And I think in some way he blames a little bit the corporate guy because him being there is the reason he wasn't with his daughter. But I'm also a little confused because I think throughout the movie, he's not really with his daughter at all.
No, I know. And he's like late to be picking her up. He never knows where she is. That like really adds to your context, your interpretation.
So I think this is very complicated in a way. We also see in multiple moments during the film, there's close-ups of pictures at the house of him, his daughter, and his wife, who is not around in the film. I get the impression that she has passed on. Mm-hmm. There's something to say about his character losing his wife. Therefore, now he has double the grief. And I think the only thing he could think of is putting the onus on somebody else primally. And that person was the person standing right next to him.
Yeah, so this is why this film was very good. I don't think that's a wrong interpretation at all, but that's not how I viewed the film.
Yeah.
You know, from my perspective, it's really boring to call a film a Rorschach test, but
Yeah.
like from my perspective, it was a theme and a parable, and I went down that direction. And you, the humanist that you are, the character-driven person that you are, started looking within the characters there and seeing why that would happen on screen.
I guess, I mean, I see the evidence in the film of like the deer is such a metaphorical part of the film, and having it be shot,
So
that's
like
when
a
it gets defensive.
like a trauma.
Yeah,
thing,
and that moment, I think, of seeing his daughter dead is literally his wound.
Yeah, totally. And actually, your interpretation makes a lot of sense with the title of the film, which is Evil Does Not Exist. The film never says evil does not exist to my recollection. So we're left to interpret that. And I think that might mean that there isn't good and evil. There's only instinct. There's animal instinct.
That's funny, is that was leading to my question is, what did you think about the title of the film?
Yeah, that's what I think. And I don't think that that's opposing with the way that I interpret the film at all. That instinctual nature of him killing him and the deer killing his daughter is exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think it still fits into this idea of parable and balance between the natural world and the incoming corporate developed world.
Yeah, which honestly, I'm not really sure how I feel about that statement. Saying that evil does not exist.
Within the context of the film, I think within the world building of the film, I'm not sure that evil exists. So you ready to go to grades?
I am ready to go to grades. I give the film an A-. I think the film is really a work of art, I would say, in many ways, because it builds such a densely thematic story with so much simplicity. With that said, I do wish the film gave a little bit more depth to some of the characters themselves. I feel like Takumi's daughter was underdeveloped a little bit for the weight of her ending in the film, and thus her end feels a little bit slight. That being said, I have been debating in my head whether that is because the film is more in service of the themes than the character, or if this choice was very intentional in order to comment on Takumi's attention as a parent, which I talked about earlier.
I was just thinking this.
Anyways, that example, I think, is a clear benefit to the film in my mind, because it shows how it's giving me, and apparently you as well, so much to ponder.
I agree. I also give the film an A-. I think it shot to like the upper echelon of like my favorite films of the year so far. I'm really, really happy I saw this. I think most notable of all is that I really felt like I was in the director's hands. Everything he was doing as a filmmaker, whether it was hiding meaning, whether it was trying to make me feel dread, using like various filmmaking tactics to make me feel a certain way, I felt like it was virtually pitch perfect throughout. And that's a very rare thing. It's a thing that happened with The Zone of Interest. It's a thing that happened with Passive Fiction. It's not a thing I feel very often. So watching this film, I felt like I was really in the hands of a master filmmaker, like somebody who was really thinking very deeply about how to use the tools that he has in order to make me feel a certain way. And in that way, it was virtually perfect.
All right, and that's it for our review of Evil Does Not Exist. Evil Does Not Exist is currently on VOD and coming to Criterion Channel soon. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about this film? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.